lots of crowdfunding examples that go viral because they were aiming for $150,000 in sales and they got $1 million worth of sales. Well, you bet all of the supplier conversations that they've dealt with are now blown up because you're in a whole different bracket and you probably have to be working with a whole different supplier at that point. In this episode, we explore the dangers of uncontrolled growth in entrepreneurship and how rapid expansion without strategy can threaten long-term success. Please subscribe to our podcast to stay updated. And for more information, visit our website at profspirit.com. Also, if you know someone who might enjoy our content, please share our podcast with them to help us grow.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing brilliantly as always. What about you, Professor Palin?
It's always very busy. The semester is rocking and rolling.
I'd love to hear that.
Right. Today, I wanted to speak about a topic it's referred to as uncontrolled growth versus controlled growth. Many people, when they're thinking in terms of business, they think if they continually expand sales, they're doing a good thing and it's a positive. But you can have your sales grow so rapidly that it could cause your company to fail. And that's a perplexing issue for many people.
It is. Forward momentum of any kind often is a great thing. It's cherished. But if it's not planned for, it can be nightmarish, actually.
Uncontrolled growth, also referred to as hypergrowth, basically to define it, it's a rapid expansion that can outpace the company's ability to manage operations effectively. And there are signs that indicate potential trouble when you're growing your business. Operational efficiencies are one sign. Cash flow issues are a very big one. Dilution of service or product quality and overwhelmed staff is another. And lastly, customer service issues are signs of potential problem that you're in hypergrowth.
And those are the warning signs. If you get past any of those warning signs and don't heed them, is when you start to see the cracks in the foundation of the company.
I had a friend many years ago, probably a couple of decades ago, when I was speaking with him, he was so excited. He was saying for the past 4 months, they had experienced 100% growth in sales every month over that period of time.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought, oh my God, you've got a problem. And he was perplexed. He was saying, no, this is great news. And I said, have you gone to speak to your banker? He says, what are you talking about? I said, your cash flow is going to implode. You're not going to be able to pay your suppliers in time. You're not going to be able to outfit the expansion you'll need, machinery, more employees. There's training issues you're going to face. You have a big problem. He looked at me and told me he thought I was crazy. A year later, they were bankrupt.
Oh no, what a devastating outcome to that.
It was so obvious to me. He was an experienced entrepreneur, had never thought that increased sales were a bad thing. And he was a marketing sales type guy. So he thought they were rocking. And my mind immediately went to, you better put some brakes on.
Right. But I don't want to confuse our listeners here. If you've prepared for that 400% growth, if you know that it's coming down the pipeline, it can be a great thing. I don't want to make it seem like we're doomsdayists and you've got to grow slow. If you're prepared for that rapid growth, this is amazing. What we're really focusing on today is when you're not prepared, and this happens before you can get behind the 8 ball.
That was one of the issues I wanted to bring up on managing and mitigating the risk. The importance of strategic planning and setting growth milestones. They're critical. And you also have to scale your operations without compromising quality and culture, which is embedded in the strategic planning. And also you have to maintain strong customer relationships during this rapid expansion. In other words, you better be listening to your customers continually to see if you're experiencing hiccups that you're not seeing, but they are seeing.
Absolutely. And especially the long-term customers. So customers you've had that were early adopters or you've had a track record with, making sure you've got your ear to the ground, as they say, because if you're just listening to the new customers, they might not have the relevant information to be giving you that quality feedback.
You also want to be speaking with your staff, because if they're overwhelmed and feeling frustrated, depends on your relationship with them. They might not relay that to you. you start to experiencing turnover at this precise time where you can't afford turnover because you have to bring new people in and train them. And there's a time lag with their efficiencies during that training. If you're going so fast, again, you're not going to deliver to your customers. You're going to see a dilution of the quality of service, product quality, etc.
I want to make the point that this can happen whether you're a physical product-based business, whether you're a service-based business, or whether you're an internet software-based business. None of them are immune to this problem. They just see the early warning signs and the fallout of it in a different way.
If you want to see some interesting case studies, I don't have one off the top of my mind, but you go with the crowdfunding sourcing of financing. There's some classic stories of people getting so many pre-orders that they can't deliver, and they just irritate the heck out of their early adopter customer base, which is critical. Again, that's an uncontrolled growth issue. Many people aren't familiar when they get into the crowdfunding component. It's a danger.
Lots of crowdfunding examples that go viral because they were aiming for $150,000 in sales and they got $1 million worth of sales. Well, you bet all of the supplier conversations that they've dealt with are now blown up because you're in a whole different bracket and you probably have to be working with a whole different supplier at that point. Any staff that they've anticipated bringing on for $150,000 sales is nowhere near adequate if you're doing $1 million for the sales.
You mentioned one that's very interesting is the source of supplies for what you're developing. Very often someone will start a venture with one source of supply, which is somewhat dangerous. But if you're moving along at a steady growth, usually not an issue, can be. But you always want to have your eye on having multiple sources of supply, because if one falls apart, one doesn't want to work with you for whatever reason, they get a larger order and you're a small customer, they may drop you. If you're going that rapidly, you better quickly have multiple sources of supply in case you lose your major supplier.
Or they can't fulfill enough of the supply. Just like small, medium, and large businesses, there are specific suppliers that focus on the boutique small companies, the mid-grade companies, or the high volume large companies, and they're not going to be the same.
It's very important when you're looking at this situation. I like to look at the causalities of uncontrolled growth. One is market pressure and competition. So you have that external push. Your competitors are coming in and your natural reaction is to push very aggressively to expand. But you want to, again, be strategic in how you plan that growth. Don't overreact to those external pressures.
If you give in to the whims of every market condition, you're going to get pushed around a lot, and your company is going to be very hard to tell what's coming up the next month or do any sort of forecasting.
This is a problem that many entrepreneurs face. I think both you and I have experienced this, but we've learned to control it, is chasing the pretty new butterfly. It's overcommitment to new opportunities. You see these opportunities, your eyes get very large, and you say, I'm going after this one, after that one. You may be successful in chasing them in short term, but that could be a long-term demise. So when you're picking new opportunities, be very strategic and analyze, can you handle those new opportunities if you have success?
I really love this example because, as you pointed out, I can definitely fall folly to that. It's exciting. Getting a new product or a new idea or an inkling that this new thing is going to be successful is intoxicating. I have to remind myself, nose to the grindstone, stay with what's working. Oftentimes I find myself with startup companies where they're doing the same thing. They launch the business with 12 points of service through a software service. And when I come on board, they have 100 that they're trying to manage. And that may sound like an exaggeration, but when you break it down, it can easily get to that point.
There are consequences associated with not planning for this and controlling it. And that's the key word, controlling. The big one, as I mentioned with my friend from back a couple of decades ago, financial instability is one of the major consequences with this. You also have quality control issues. Loss of company culture is one that we haven't addressed. And that can be very important also. You can actually create a negative company culture from all of the pressures of deliverables within this type of issue. And then that results in customer service challenges.
A big one that I find in the modern era when this rapid growth happens because we sort of live in this era where the startup culture is becoming more pervasive, even in corporate settings, you start giving people more responsibilities that are outside of their job scope. So they can do this one more task. They can do this one more task. And you hear quite readily from the employee that they're not happy with that. They were hired and they have this specific job role and they're uncomfortable doing anything outside of it.
Especially if they're responsible for the outcome, but they're not prepared or qualified to handle a particular issue. You're, again, causing excessive stress, frustration on their part, and you will have an ex-employee very quickly.
Prepared, trained, qualified, they're none of the above. But, oh crap, we've grown, we need somebody to do it.
Another interesting part of that is because of the excessive financial pressures that are associated with this, very often that same person doesn't have the resources. Even if they're qualified and trained to do this, there's a lacking of resources to accomplish whatever task, which builds upon the frustration and the anxiety. One of my favorite examples of uncontrolled growth that led to the demise of a company, it was during the .com bubble. So you may not be familiar with this one. It was pets.com. They raised millions and millions of dollars in VC capital. They were going to, on the internet, control all pet supplies, pet paraphernalia, etc. It was called pets.com. They expanded rapidly. They invested heavily in marketing and infrastructure. They struggled due to a lack of demand. They grew their internal component of the company so rapidly. They actually spent a majority of their marketing budget on one Super Bowl ad.
That's really putting it all on black, isn't it?
Yes. So when you have a startup and you spend all of your money on, I don't know what a Super Bowl ad cost in those days, and they rolled the dice on that one, and the company famously collapsed within a few years, they were unable to sustain their business model.
Wow. That's frustrating, isn't it?
I remember watching that Super Bowl. I was familiar with the company because they were in the startup realm and they had become very well known for all of the venture capital they had raised. I remember looking and saying, oh my God, they've got a Super Bowl ad coming in. And they really don't even have the establishment to cover that. And it was correct. On the flip side, a success story in surviving hypergrowth is Lego. I don't know if you're familiar with their story. In the early 2000s, they nearly went bankrupt. And it was due to over-diversification, rapid expansions into various markets that diluted its business core. They were close to demise. They realized it and they restructured its operation, going back to their core product line. As a result, it boosted operational efficiency. They embraced new marketing strategies, and that correction, they were able to survive to be the successful company we see today.
Yeah, you'd love to hear the opposite side of that. It's an important reminder that if you are familiar and tracking with this concept, most of the time you can survive it. It's not like you start to see these early warning signs of hypergrowth and think, oh no, it's over. If you're ahead of it, you can actually use this hypergrowth to your benefit.
Absolutely. In conclusion, do you have any final thoughts on uncontrolled growth?
I would just pay attention to it. Most of the podcast topics we talk about, it's something to keep in the back of your mind. Get into the practice of analyzing growth, not just from a growth equals positive, looking at it critically and saying, is this the growth we planned for? And if it's above or below, what are the metrics that we need to take into account to make sure that we're hitting the goals that we put out there?
Exactly. I agree with you 100%. And if anyone listening that is driving a business, if they don't have a growth strategy, I would go formulate a growth strategy. And with this in mind of planning, that would be my suggestion.
Without a doubt.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
We extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Check out profspirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.